I used to think temptation belonged to strangers, to chance encounters in airports or quiet hotel bars where no one knew your name and you could pretend to be someone else. But I was wrong. Temptation can arrive at your very doorstep, disguised as something familiar, something harmless, until suddenly it is neither. That summer, it arrived in the form of Ethan. He wasn't a stranger. Far from it. I'd known him for years in the peripheral way you know a family friend's child. I'd seen him at birthdays, caught glimpses of him in Christmas photos, remembered him as a boy tugging at his father's sleeve. But when he walked through my front door that June, carrying a duffel bag slung over his shoulder, he wasn't that boy anymore. He was a man, taller, sharper around the edges, his smile carrying a quiet confidence that startled me. "Thanks again for letting me stay," he said, his voice deeper than I remembered. My husband Daniel clapped him on the back, welcoming him like the son he never had. I smiled politely, but something in Ethan's eyes lingered on mine a second longer than politeness required. At first, I ignored it. Guests bring a kind of energy into a home, and I chalked up the shift in atmosphere to novelty. He helped with groceries, fixed things Daniel hadn't gotten around to, told stories about finishing graduate school and the uncertainty of what came next. He was polite, attentive, easy to be around, and yet, beneath all of that, there was a current I didn't want to name. It revealed itself in moments too subtle to explain. A brush of his arm against mine as we passed in the hallway. The way he asked questions no one else bothered to ask, about my work, my routines, the things that made me feel seen. One night, as we stood side by side at the sink drying dishes, his hand grazed mine. Neither of us moved for a heartbeat too long. That was when I realized it wasn't just in my head. The conflict settled in my chest like a stone. I loved Daniel, or at least I loved the life we had built. Safe, predictable, a marriage steady enough to last but quiet enough to sometimes feel invisible. And here was Ethan, a reminder of everything dangerous about being noticed. I told myself I could manage it, that lines once drawn were easy to keep. But deep down, I already knew. The line had blurred the moment he looked at me that first night, with a question in his eyes I wasn't supposed to answer. And worse still, part of me wanted to answer it. Marriage, at least mine, was never defined by grand gestures. Daniel and I built our life on steadiness. A mortgage paid on time, dinners eaten at the same table, conversations that rarely strayed beyond the predictable rhythms of work and weather. He was a man of order, the kind who found comfort in routines, who saw loyalty as the highest form of love. And for years I believed that was enough, but over time, silence crept in. Not the sharp kind that cuts after an argument, but the dull, padded quiet that settles when two people stop reaching for each other. We still touched, still smiled, still shared a bed, but the closeness had become an arrangement, not a choice. It was into this silence that Ethan arrived. He filled the empty spaces without meaning to. Where Daniel spoke in brief nods and half answers after long days at the office, Ethan asked questions that unfolded into hours of talk. Where Daniel retreated into paperwork and television, Ethan leaned into presence, washing dishes beside me, helping chop vegetables, or simply lingering in the kitchen as though the act of standing near carried its own meaning. At first, I welcomed the change. The house felt lighter, laughter echoing in rooms that had grown used to muted tones. I told myself it was harmless, that I was simply enjoying company. After all, he was family in every sense that mattered, except the one that suddenly mattered most. It was a small moment that unsettled me. One evening, Daniel excused himself early, exhausted from a long day, leaving Ethan and me at the dinner table. The conversation drifted to his future, the city he would soon move to, the uncertainty of starting fresh. His eyes were bright with possibility, but when he asked, "Did you ever wish you'd chosen differently?" something in his voice made me pause. I hesitated, fork poised midair, because the question wasn't about cities or careers. It was about choices, about lives lived and unlived. And when our eyes met, the silence stretched until my heart began to pound in my ears. I answered lightly, forcing a smile, deflecting with a half-truth about how everyone wonders at times. But the damage was done. The question lodged itself inside me like a splinter. That night, lying beside Daniel as he slept. I replayed it over and over, wondering if Ethan had seen through me, or worse, if he felt the same pull I was beginning to admit to myself. By then, the conflict was no longer abstract. It wasn't just about loyalty to my husband. It was about confronting a hunger I thought I had long buried. The desire to be chosen, to be seen, to feel alive again. And Ethan, without realizing, had already become the mirror reflecting everything I lacked. It's never the grand events that undo a person. It's the accumulation of small, ordinary moments that begin to press on the heart until it caves. With Ethan, those moments multiplied quickly, and soon the air in our home felt charged with a tension no one dared name. It began with glances. Fleeting, harmless on the surface, but electric beneath. I'd catch his eyes lingering across the dinner table, a second too long on mine before he shifted his gaze. Or in the mornings when he walked into the kitchen, hair still damp from the shower, his smile carried an intimacy that unsettled me. Daniel noticed nothing. He was buried in deadlines, grateful for the help Ethan offered with chores and errands. If anything, he encouraged the bond forming between us, oblivious to the dangerous undercurrent pulling at its edges. "It's good for you," he said once when I laughed too loudly at one of Ethan's stories. "You should have more company like him." What Daniel couldn't see was how Ethan filled the silence he himself had left. Each night, when Daniel fell asleep early, Ethan and I drifted into the living room. Movies became our excuse, though we barely watched them. The conversations mattered more, sprawling, restless talks about choices, regrets, and the restless hunger of wanting something you couldn't name. It was during one of those nights that the line first trembled. A comedy played muted on the screen, laughter canned and hollow. I stretched out on the couch, and Ethan sat closer than usual, his knee brushing mine. Neither of us moved. The contact was so slight it could have been dismissed, but I felt the spark rush through me all the same. I told myself to get up, to break the spell. Instead, I leaned into it, not physically, but by staying exactly where I was, allowing the moment to hold me. Afterward, lying awake in bed, I tried to convince myself it was meaningless. Just proximity, just imagination. But the lie rang hollow. Every nerve in my body knew what it meant. The days that followed were worse. Once a boundary shifts even slightly, it never settles back into place. Passing in the hallway, I felt his hand brush against mine, too deliberate to be accidental. At the sink, our shoulders touched, and neither of us pulled away. Every touch whispered a question we both pretended not to hear. By the third week, silence itself became unbearable. The air thickened whenever we were alone. Our conversations waited with the things unsaid. I found myself anticipating his footsteps, straining to hear his voice, inventing reasons to be near him, and beneath it all grew a terrifying awareness. It wasn't just temptation anymore. It was inevitability. The night it happened was unremarkable in every way, which is perhaps why it caught me so off guard. No storm clouds, no arguments, no excuses. Just the three of us at dinner, Daniel distracted with his phone, Ethan unusually quiet. Later, Daniel excused himself early, muttering something about an early meeting. I stayed in the kitchen, clearing dishes when Ethan stepped in to help. The silence stretched as we moved around each other, careful, too careful, like dancers trying not to collide while knowing the choreography had already been set. When I handed him a plate, our fingers touched and didn't let go. For one heartbeat, then two. My pulse hammered in my ears. I should have pulled away. I didn't. Why do we keep doing this? Ethan's voice was low, strained. I opened my mouth, but no words came. Because what answer could I give? That I was lonely? That his presence made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in years? That I both hated and craved the inevitability of it? I don't know, I whispered finally. He set the plate down, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. Then he stepped closer, so close I could smell the faint trace of soap on his skin. My chest tightened, torn between the weight of betrayal and the desperate hunger for something real. "We shouldn't," he said. "I know," I replied. But neither of us moved. When it finally happened, it wasn't explosive. No sudden rush, no reckless abandon. It was slow, deliberate, almost fragile, like two people testing the edges of something too dangerous to hold. Every second was laced with both desire and dread. Every touch a reminder of the line we were crossing and the impossibility of stepping back once we did. And yet, I didn't stop him. Afterward, the silence was deafening. We sat side by side on the couch, the glow of the forgotten television painting the room in cold light. My hands trembled in my lap, shame and exhilaration warring inside me. Ethan finally spoke. "What do we do now?" I stared at him, at the fear in his eyes that mirrored my own, and I realized with a sinking certainty there was no undoing it. The truth was written into the air between us, undeniable, irreversible. That night, I lay awake beside Daniel, his steady breathing like a metronome to my guilt. The revelation wasn't just that I had betrayed him. It was that, in the deepest part of myself, I had wanted to, and wanting was the one thing I couldn't excuse. Ethan left 2 weeks later, his departure marked by nothing more dramatic than a suitcase dragged down the steps and a polite goodbye at the door. Daniel hugged him, wished him luck, clapped him on the back as though nothing in the world could be amiss. I stood a little behind, my smile practiced, my heart pounding with the weight of everything unspoken. The car drove away, and silence returned to the house. But it was no longer the dull quiet that had filled the rooms before his visit. This silence was heavier, sharper, threaded with memory. I couldn't walk through the kitchen without seeing his face in the shadows, couldn't sit on the couch without feeling the ghost of what had happened there. Daniel noticed my restlessness. "You miss the company," he said one evening, mistaking my distraction for loneliness. "The house feels emptier, doesn't it?" I nodded, grateful for his misreading, even as guilt coiled tighter in my chest. He thought I missed Ethan's laughter, his energy, his youthful presence. What I truly missed was more dangerous. The way he made me feel alive. The way he reminded me of something I thought I'd lost forever. For days after Ethan left, I carried the secret like a second skin. It clung to me during ordinary moments, folding laundry, stirring soup, answering emails, a reminder that I was no longer the woman I had been before. I had crossed a line, not only with Ethan but within myself. The betrayal wasn't only in the act. It was in the desire, in the knowledge that given the choice again, I might not resist. I never told Daniel. Perhaps that makes me a coward, or perhaps it makes me merciful. I still don't know. To confess would be to shatter the fragile life we had built. To wound a man who had given me loyalty even when love had softened into routine. But to remain silent is its own kind of dishonesty, one that seeps into every shared glance, every conversation, every touch of his hand against mine. Sometimes late at night, I replay it all, the glances, the laughter, the way inevitability hummed beneath the surface until it finally broke through. I wonder if Ethan thinks of it at all, or if it has already been buried under the weight of his new life. Perhaps for him, it was a fleeting mistake, a chapter quickly closed. For me, it lingers like a bruise that refuses to fade. What remains is not the memory of what happened, but the reflection it forced upon me. I can no longer pretend that loyalty alone sustains me, or that silence equates to happiness. I've learned that infidelity does not always erupt from fury or dissatisfaction. Sometimes it grows quietly, in the spaces where we long to be seen, where comfort has dulled into invisibility, and so I live with it. Not as a scandal, not as a confession, but as a truth etched into my own story. A truth I cannot erase, and one I cannot share.